Hello and welcome back. This week we are talking about probably the most asked question that we see is, should I buy now or wait? So if you've ever asked that question or you wanted to put the numbers together, we're going to put together a formula that you can use for your situation and determine whether now is a good time to buy or if you should wait. So stay tuned and we're going to get right back into it. Welcome to Mortgage Momentum. Smart guidance, real stories, better home decisions. We are your hosts. I'm Jarod Temple.
And I'm Danielle Hugunin. Thanks for joining us today. This is your go-to space for strategy, stories, and staying sharp in an ever-shifting market.
Let's jump in and get the momentum rolling. Welcome back to Mortgage Momentum. I am your host, Jarod Temple, and
I'm Danielle Hugunin.
Thanks for joining us again. Today, we wanted to talk about buy now versus waiting. How often do you get asked this question?
A lot. And in more than it just being a question, sometimes it's I'm just going to wait to save more money until later.
Yep.
So I wish I got asked the question instead of just the answer being made sometimes, but it definitely is a topic of conversation.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of thoughts about this, good and bad, right and wrong, and I thought we could maybe just kind of discuss some of the things that go into it and then put the tool into people's hands so they can decide for themselves if it's time to wait or if it's time to buy. And spoiler alert, it is probably time to buy.
It's always time to buy.
It's always time to buy. The best time to buy was yesterday, right?
Right.
But anyways, so let's start talking about why buyers have been sitting on the sidelines. Sure. How often, you said you get that question all the time. What influences people's decision to wait?
I think there are a couple of things happening right now. The conversation of rate is not necessarily first and foremost anymore. It was for a while. I'm not saying any of us have gotten used to higher rates, but that doesn't necessarily isn't always the first thing that comes out of somebody's mouth. I think that the more challenging thing, at least in our market, is lack of inventory and then just overall affordability, which at this point is influenced almost as much by taxes and insurance as it is by rate.
Yep.
So those are the two biggest things. And I think depending on who the buyer is, first-time home buyers, it's very disheartening to continue to lose out when you're making offers on properties. And repeat buyers are usually moving for something specific, and it might take them a while to find that something specific. So we have a couple things going on.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of people that think rates are, we're coming off of historic low rates.
Right.
So there's an entire class of people looking that have never seen rates, below 5.
Right.
Or above 5, excuse me.
Right.
And so those people are like, oh my gosh, this rate is awful.
Yeah.
So nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody knows where rates are going. And rates do come up and come down. And there's so many external factors, geopolitical, economy, all these things that kind of go into what affects rates. And the reality of it is that I don't think anybody has ever nailed it perfectly, nailed the market, at least not on purpose.
Right.
I think there's some people that are lucky and
yeah.
like, oh yeah, I've got the lowest rate ever. Somebody
right.
has it.
Yeah.
But that's not because that person waited for that moment. He just
right.
got lucky.
Right.
So I think it's important to remember that it's not really about predicting what rates are or where they're going to go. There's some strategy behind that, especially if you're under contract and you're deciding whether or not you want to lock or not. But rates change so fast, and I think a lot of people miss out on great opportunities and great homes because they're worried about a quarter in interest rate.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to understand the cost of each decision and kind of look at what things are influencing people's decisions. So today I kind of wanted to talk about and give our listeners a simple formula so that they can kind of calculate, what is the cost of waiting. So before we start that, let's talk about what buyers get wrong.
Right.
What are some assumptions that most buyers assume?
Well, a big one is that if rates are lower, then, it's, hey, I'm going to get a better deal. My payment's going to be better. If rates are higher, it's going to be worse. But the reality is that when rates go down, and I mean, this was evidenced several months ago when rates were finally at their lowest levels since 2022 for just a hot second. They started with a 5. There were a lot of buyers that flooded the market and there was more inventory. However, more buyers means more competition. And so while the rate may have been maybe a half a point better, you might have paid 10 to 20% over asking price just to get that house. And so at the end of the day, it almost like evens itself out, if not more. And so I think, rates falling is great. It's great for all of us, but you definitely have more competition.
Yeah.
And you're probably going to pay more for the house that you're interested in than you would have 6 months ago, just because there might be 10 other people that want this house.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a lot of strategies listing agents use too. Say your house is worth $400 and they list it at $380.
Right.
And they do that intentionally, which is a great strategy because they know that it's going to pique people's interest as they come across it. And they're like, oh, we're going to make an offer on this. That's a steal. Let's offer $420.
Right.
So it's worth $400. They list it at $380 and they get an offer for $420. And that's a great way for them to position it because they're representing the seller.
Yeah.
But to your point, a lot of that is kind of smoke and mirrors a little bit.
Yeah.
And rates do have an effect in who's going to be coming to the market.
Right.
So
definitely. The other thing is that, rate's the only thing. It's like the only thing anybody ever hyper focuses on. But there are so many other things that have across the country, affected affordability, insurance being a huge point of that. Some of my clients' policy premiums have doubled over the last 3 or 4 years. I've seen some staggering statistics on this.
Yeah.
Property taxes too. And this is, not just here in our community, but across the country. In many cases, someone's tax and insurance portion of their payment might exceed the principal and interest portion of their payment. But no one's really talking about that either.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So there are some factors that go into what affects, people's decision on whether or not they should wait or not. You've got home appreciation.
Right.
If you buy now versus waiting a year, what are you missing out on? You've got payments for rent for those 12 months. There's equity that you could be missing out on and, equity accumulation. You already kind of touched on the future competition.
Right.
And, of course, interest rates. And I hate when people say date the rate, marry the house. But it's so very true.
It is a super cheesy saying.
It is, and it's overused. And
it is.
I see it and I cringe. And I'm like,
cringy.
Don't say that. I get what you're saying, but just say it the long way.
Right. But
it's true. How many people do you know that bought a house 30 years ago and just paid it off with that same mortgage?
I've, in 20 something years, I won't date myself, of being in this business, I have had one person tell me that. And it wasn't even my buyer. It was someone's grandma that was co-signing for them.
Yeah. It just doesn't happen. People look at it and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have this 6.5% rate for 30 years. No, you're not.
I mean, the likelihood of you staying in one place for 30 years is very slim to start with.
Yeah, things happen. You have kids, you become an empty nester, you get divorced, you get married, you have more kids, and all of these things factor into the housing that you have. And it's easy to look at it and say 30 years, 6.5, that's crazy. But you also have refinance opportunities. And you may want to tap into the equity. And there's a myriad of reasons that people will not be in that loan. So I think it's smart for people to look at things and say, hey, this is really temporary.
Yeah.
Yes, it could last for 30 years.
Yeah.
But it's not gonna.
I mean, on that same token, though, you can't just say you'll be able to refinance later, right? So
True.
The important thing I try and help people focus on is less about rate and dollars and more about your budget and your lifestyle. Does this payment for this house, does this house meet your needs, and does this payment meet the financial needs of your budget? If it does, there is no logical reason to continue to feel like we need to focus on rate, because the payment's manageable, the house meets your needs. And then to your point, the minute you own that house, you start to accumulate equity. I can tell you that every person that I have that has waited over the last 2, 3, 4 years since COVID, all of them regret it because they've lost out on so much equity opportunity, and it's more expensive now.
Yeah.
And that's just reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Not to date myself, but my mom talked about the first house she bought being $30,000, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's ridiculous. But now I'm looking at it, my first home, was $189,000,
Yeah.
and now I'm like, oh my gosh, that's almost like $30,000 for what I was thinking
Right.
of.
Compared to what we are. Yeah.
Yeah,
Totally.
And the sooner you get into the game, the sooner you start tapping into that equity growth.
Yeah.
And equity kind of ebbs and flows and goes up and down too, but it's kind of like the stock market. It'll go
100%.
down, but it's in an upward trajectory.
It's an investment.
It's an investment, and land is scarce. They're not making more of it, and eventually, if you don't want to live outside of the city, costs are going to go up.
Right.
So, and you see that in Kansas City specifically when people are moving south and they're moving north and they're getting outside. When I first moved to Kansas City, 135th Street
Was south.
that's a cow field.
Oh, yeah.
A pasture. And now I had lunch today on 159th, and I'm like, where am I at? I heard banjos playing, and I'm like, where am I going?
I mean,
and it's like civilization still. It's crazy.
We're building houses on 189th right now. I mean, so we're going south and north too. I mean, you love your Northland.
That's right. It's God's country. And it's because of affordability, You have to get away from the masses to buy land cheap enough to warrant building. So it's anyways, we went down a rabbit hole there.
Yeah, but it's all valid. I mean, it's true.
Yeah. So let's walk through an example, and we're going to put this up on the board for those following along via video, but kind of want to go through a generic example, and then you can plug your own numbers in and then decide if this makes sense. So for our example, we're going to look at the cost of waiting, and to get that formula figured out, we're going to use home appreciation loss, rent paid during the waiting period, principal pay down, and then potential interest savings. So for our example, let's use a $400,000 sales price.
Okay.
Let's assume someone says they want to wait 12 months. A conservative amount of appreciation in Kansas City would be 4%, and we'll use that for this number. But we were talking about this earlier. That is pretty conservative, I would say. I think 5 to 7 is probably more likely, and
in some areas closer to the city, it's far greater than that too.
Yeah, I mean, it really is situational from where you're looking.
Yeah,
if you're looking at a house in Prairie Village, versus Gardner, completely different.
Kansas City's grown. I mean, it's expansive.
Yeah. So, for purposes of this example, we're going to use 4% though, and then a monthly rent of $2,000, which is crazy too.
So we're assuming a loan amount of $400,000, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Loan amount of $400,000.
Okay.
So first, the appreciation costs. You've got the $400,000 times 4%. That's $16,000, and the new home now costs a year from today $416,000. That's real money.
Mm-hmm.
That's money that when they go to sell, they're going to be able to tap into, and I think a lot of people, that's lost on a lot of people.
Right.
It seems like casino money, your equity does, because you don't see it, you don't touch it, you can't feel it, and until you really go to sell or refinance, you don't get to access it.
Yeah.
So it feels like funny money, but it's real.
Like crypto.
Yeah, like crypto, exactly. It's gone.
But was it ever really there?
Yeah. So, but the reality of it is, and you know this, one of the biggest factors for generational wealth is real estate, and you can crunch the numbers or chat GPT it or whatever and say, if I rent for the rest of my life versus if I buy a house now for this, what's my equity position when I'm ready to retire?
Yeah.
And it is a staggering difference.
Yeah.
This is the difference between being comfortable and having to work for 15 more years.
Sure.
And I think a lot of people, especially young people, don't take that into consideration. I sure didn't. So anyways, step 2 is rent that you pay. So if you're paying $2,000 a month in rent for 12 months, this is quick math. Are you ready for it? $24,000.
We can do math today.
I was told there'd be no math, but here we are. So $24,000, also a real cost that you're paying to your landlord. That's money. That's a sunk cost, right?
Yeah. You don't get it back. Actually, it's interesting. I had a couple of clients in the last few months that ended up buying the house that they had been renting. And one of them had been renting this house for, I think it was 7 or 8 years.
Oh.
And so obviously they are still living in their house, but it's just now theirs.
Yeah.
And they're paying a lot more than they would have 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah. And
So
it costs them a bunch too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Stop waiting. Step 3, principal reduction. So approximately, with amortization, initially, if you did a 30-year note, you're paying a big chunk of your payment goes to the interest versus principal. But even still, you're looking at $3,000 to $5,000. So let's say $4,000 in principal reduction. In other words, just by making your monthly payment, you're reducing the balance owed, which is adding to the amount of equity that you have in your home.
Right.
So that's $4,000. Total cost so far is $16,000 plus $24,000 plus $4,000. That's $44,000.
So we're saying, hypothetically, this is a 1-year scenario, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So we've lost $16,000 in potential equity or appreciation.
Yep.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
$24,000 in rent that you've paid for someone else's mortgage.
Yep.
And $4,000 in principal reduction, which is your investment. This is your gain in your investment. Mm-hmm. So yes, it's not real money, but this is a really good breakdown of, what's a very real scenario.
Yeah. And,
okay.
And what does $44,000 mean to you? That's huge. And that's 1 year, and it compounds.
Yeah. Now, granted, you are making mortgage payments.
Yeah.
So there is that to consider. But again, you're getting something from it. It's like putting money into a stock.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's not making that much money, it's still something.
Yeah. So with that example, which was conservative,
right,
you're at $44,000. Now, on the other side of things, let's talk about potential interest savings. So say rates are at 7% today, which they're not.
No.
They're better than that right now. But say they jump from 7% to 6.25%.
You mean they fall?
They fall. Yeah. Did I say jump? Jump down.
Jump. We want to fall down.
Fall down, yeah. Fall down. So in that scenario, it's roughly $190 a month on a $320,000 loan. So your annual savings is $2,280. So the buyer waits a year. They potentially gain $2,280 a year, and
in rate savings.
Okay. But it cost them $44,000. How many years does it take you to recover the $44,000?
Well, that's
$44,000
hard to quantify, but yeah.
Yeah, because it compounds, it grows.
Yeah.
I think 9 times out of 10, and probably more like 9.9 times out of 10, people are better off not waiting.
Yeah.
So,
the other thing with that same scenario is I also get a lot of people that say, well, we only have 3% down or 5% down, which, by the way, you only need 3% or 5% down. we want to wait until we have 10% or 20%. When you break down what that does for your payment, same rate, different down payment, it's minimal.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on the size of your loan, but saving another 5% down or 10% down, the increase in the price of the house is likely going to be the same or more of that. And
Yeah.
so it doesn't math out
Yeah.
at all.
Well, and let's be honest, most Americans aren't really known for being great savers. Things happen, life happens. Like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I'm going to tap into that, and it doesn't get replaced. And,
Yeah.
And literally, some people, if they waited for 20% down, will never buy a home.
Right.
And it gets harder and harder because your target's moving. 20% today is less money than 20% tomorrow, and in 12 months and in a year from now. So
Right.
you're chasing something that you'd be better off just getting a start on.
Right.
So I think if you work the numbers, I think it's pretty glaring when you look at these factors. And I get it. We do this every day. Most people don't look at this and like, oh yeah, but what about depreciation? They don't think about that because it's not their business.
Yeah.
And it is, when you see it on paper, it's pretty
Right.
glaring and helps make the decision pretty simple, I think.
Yeah.
So back to the date the rate, which I hate.
You hate to date the rate.
You hate? That rhymes? It's like Cat in the Hat. There is refinance options, and like we kind of touched on, nobody or very few people are in their mortgage for the life of the mortgage.
Right.
It just doesn't happen. Life happens. So it is truly advantageous, and oftentimes as you start to build that equity, there's a lot of advantages to refinancing if the market improves, obviously. But a lot of times we'll see someone that can reduce their term by 15 years.
Yes.
Which is hundreds of thousands of dollars in interest.
Or even 10, going from 30 to a 20. I have a lot of people that do that. And the payment might be the same, but that allows you to have even further principal reduction.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to me, it's about, having financial freedom. And if you buy a house when you're young, it just 10 times, 20 times, 100 times, I don't know what the times is. But it just accelerates the ability for you to have financial freedom. And I'm not sitting around here planning to live off my Social Security income. I don't think it's going to be here. It's certainly not going to be what I think it's going to be, and it's not going to be ready when I'm ready to retire either. So it's people don't think about the retirement piece of things, and until it's too late.
My kids are going to take care of me when I'm old. I don't know about you.
That is, my mom used to say the same thing. Well, guess what? My sister will, maybe, but no, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I mean, but you don't want to put that on your kids either. But
I was just joking.
I know, because they won't.
Mom, Dad, if you're listening.
Yeah, exactly. So, you buy today's home. Rates aren't, at their lowest. It's not the end of the world. You lock in on today's price.
Sure.
And to me, that's more important than what today's rate is. If you can handle the payment and you're comfortable with the payment, buy the home at today's.
How old were you when
price.
you bought your first house?
Oh, that's a crazy question.
I was 23.
I was not 23. I was in my 20s, but I don't even know.
I didn't buy it alone. I probably
20s.
couldn't have bought it alone.
I didn't either. Late 20s. And I wish I would have started earlier. I could have done it earlier.
Yeah.
It just didn't occur to me. I was like, oh, where do I want to live? Oh, what if I want to move to Colorado?
Totally. I mean, and that's fair.
Yeah.
As a young kid.
Yeah.
Not
for
everyone
sure.
just wants to plant roots and settle down right away.
Yeah, no doubt. But I think getting a jump start on it at today's price is huge. You can capture today's equity growth and always refinance down the road.
Right.
But what you cannot do is go back and buy today's home at today's price next year. You can refinance a rate, but you cannot refinance the purchase price. And I don't know. That just resonates with me because I see it every day. And
Yeah.
people ask the questions, and it's just such a huge piece.
Well, I'm doing a refinance for someone right now that bought 2 years ago, and probably in the 140th to 150th range area of OP, and they put 10% down. And there are several reasons that they need to refinance right now, but they had PMI, private mortgage insurance, because they put down less than 10%. 2 years later, that house has appreciated enough to eliminate that. They no longer have that because they have 10% more equity in 2 years than they had when they bought it. So other things, I mean, that's fast.
Yeah, that's really fast.
Yeah.
Faster than I think usual even. Maybe not.
We're in a growth market here.
It is, for sure. Well, and the other thing that's great about the KC Metro is we also don't see, historically, we haven't seen huge drops. You know, we haven't seen a 20% like in some of the sand
Coastal,
states.
yeah.
You know, when things happen, like in Vegas, when things drop 25% overnight, basically, not that long ago.
Yeah.
So we don't really see that. We're I don't want to say we're completely safe from it, but
A little more insulated.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Midwest in general.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about some situations where waiting might make sense. You know, to me, it's about you want to be balanced.
Yeah.
You don't want to be overextended.
Yeah.
You see people, you know, that buy this really nice house that's at the upper end of what they can afford, and their kitchen table is a folding table, and
We're eating
camp
mac
chairs.
and cheese every night.
Yeah, or we can't go to a movie
Because you're house poor.
because you're house poor.
Yeah.
And that sucks.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes it does make sense to wait just a little bit, or at least move your expectations.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
Obviously, if you don't have stable income,
Yeah.
obviously,
Stable income is important.
yes.
Not only is it good to have that to make your payment, it's required by your
And
lender.
It's somewhat required, yeah. I think definitely you want to have stable income. So if you have a little or no emergency savings, I think you should have some savings.
I totally agree, and this is another conversation that comes up a lot. It's you know, we want to put every dollar that we have either in savings or that we're netting from the sale of another house into the new house.
Mm-hmm.
But yet we still have other debt, right?
Yeah.
And so keeping savings is important. Life happens, you never know.
Yeah.
And also, if you have funds, eliminate your credit card debt at 20% interest. You know, you don't need to put down $150,000 on your house.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
100%. Another thing, if you are putting down a big down payment, I think it's also smart to take out a HELOC with the equity.
Now we're going down a whole nother road right now.
Maybe we say that for another episode. We are under some time constraints, but we'll talk about that some other time. Another reason you may want to wait is if you know you're going to relocate, or if a relocation is pending. Doesn't make a lot of sense to put down roots now if in 8 months from now.
Yeah, and it costs money to buy and sell too. I mean,
there's real estate commissions,
moving costs,
yeah.
you know. Yes,
Yeah.
agree.
So obviously you need to be here for.
Weigh that out.
Oh, yeah.
Unless you want to convert it into a rental.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
You kind of touched on this high interest rate debt. It doesn't make sense if you've got $70,000 on your Home Depot card at 19% interest. Probably ought to knock that out first. And you know, sometimes there's situations too where we run into all the time where maybe somebody has had a life event and their credit has been dinged, or they need to do some repair. You know, life happens.
Yeah, for sure.
And bad things happen to good people. We see that every day too. And sometimes getting your financial house kind of back in order. You know, I think most people we talk to, even people that maybe don't qualify right now, it's not really a no, it's a not now.
Yeah.
And here's what you need to do to put yourself in a position where you can buy a house. And I think those are some considerations too, where maybe those situations, maybe you need to tap the brakes or wait.
Yeah. Yeah, but if you're working with a good lender, you know.
They'll tell you that.
we'll put you on a plan. Here's exactly what you do. Here's how long it takes. And if you're really committed to buying a house, you're going to do it. You just have, to your point, may have to wait a little bit.
I think waiting for personal financial reasons and stability is way different than trying to time the market.
Mm-hmm.
And 9 out of 10 conversations, when they're asking that question, it's not because of that reason. It's because, I think maybe I should wait because interest rates. And I don't think, people are trying to be prudent with their money, and I want them to be, but they also don't see the entire picture.
Right.
And I think that's kind of the key.
I think it depends on what kind of buyer we're talking about, but with first-time home buyers or even second-time buyers, yes. Later in life buyers presents a little bit of a different, unique, reservation, if you will. It's, why would I sell this house that I have all of this equity in to buy something smaller that costs more money every month and just to buy it? It doesn't make sense. So then that is why we have not as many houses on the market.
Yep.
I did see an article the other day talking about how it costs more to buy an existing house in Kansas City now than to build. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. Very good. Interesting. All right. I'm going to hit you with some scenarios.
All right. Let's do it.
I want your thoughts and opinions and maybe even some real life
Stories.
examples. Yeah. So scenario 1, wait or buy. First-time home buyer, they have a good job, stable income, and they have enough savings.
What's enough?
Let's say 6 months reserves and 5% down.
Okay. Buy all day.
All day.
Again, if you find the house that meets your needs. Case in point, our friend Maggie that was on our podcast with us, and also first-time homebuyers, reminder, there are grants, there are funds available for you. Not if you make too much money, but hey, it's out there. And so you never know. You may find the perfect house and it may be the same every month as your rent, but you don't know until you try.
Yep.
And I would say no first-time home buyer, most first-time home buyers only have 3 to 5% to put down. But that's not what they end up with, and that's how you get house number 2. So in that scenario, all day long.
All day long. I agree. Okay, how about someone that is newly self-employed or has a history of being in a field, made great money, but 2 months ago they decided they're going to go out on their own and start their own business. So newly self-employed.
Okay. So unfortunately, in that situation, unless they have a very strong cosigner, they are going to have to wait because any income, in self-employed income included, commission, variable, bonus, overtime, we generally require a 2-year history of seeing that income because it is variable. So it's pretty difficult to get around a brand new self-employed person in terms of having income you can use, unless they have a spouse, a cosigner, a ton of assets. There are ways to do it, but generally speaking, unfortunately, if you have a new business and you have a great accountant and you're writing everything off, you're probably going to have to wait.
Yep. Well, and like you said, if you have a spouse that qualifies on their own, maybe you're just not on the loan.
Yeah.
Your spouse buys it.
Yep. We always look at that too.
Yeah, and always, a lot of times, certain scenarios, it makes sense to do that.
Yeah, definitely.
So maybe. I don't want to say no.
Right.
Get more info. All right. This is one that seems to be a bigger thing now than certainly when I was a kid, but you have a family member living with you and saving aggressively. So your kid graduates college and returns home to the nest. Buy now or wait?
Number one, no one's returning to my nest when that happens.
Yeah. No doubt.
That's an interesting one because I have a lot of respect for the younger generation that values saving and being financially prudent. It's actually very encouraging. This entire generation that watched their parents lose everything in 2008, they're cautious, they're educated, they're debt free, they save. That matters to them. And so I think that I can't argue with the fact that portion of our future generation, it's encouraging to see that. And sometimes it helps, but the mindset of I'm just going to save more and not even have the conversation or look at the numbers is where I say, no.
Yeah. Well, and it gets back to that getting started on the wealth trajectory. You're not doing your kid any favors by saving them $1,800 in a mortgage payment, really. Because long term, like the scenario we went through, that's $44,000 a year. You just cost your kid by trying to be nice and trying to care for them.
Yeah.
And look at me, I've got a 4 and a 6-year-old, and I'm already trying to pretend like I know how that situation looks and feels. But truly, if they waited a year or two, especially if they could buy now, it's really costing them. So
yeah, I see pros and cons to this one, but
yeah.
And honestly, the multi-generational housing is becoming a much, and this is a totally another maybe topic for another podcast, but I see parents and adult kids combining their households a lot. I have 3 clients right now currently where the older parents are selling their houses and they are moving in with their adult children versus moving into maybe assisted living because they're generally healthy but probably shouldn't be living on their own. So, we're building houses with separate mother-in-law suites, with, 8, units behind them, combining households together. So, on the flip side, that can go 2 ways, but I mean, that we're going to see, I think, that's going to move the housing industry in a different direction in the future.
Yeah. Well, certainly as things become less affordable,
yeah,
it's a good way to be able to afford more by adding income.
Totally.
So that's definitely something that's going to be a bigger consideration. So anything else you want to add on that? I think this is a great topic.
Yeah, totally.
And literally get asked this all the time. So it's, I think it resonates with a lot of people, and hopefully this helps. If you're interested in getting this cost calculator sent to us, email us at mortgagemomentum@bell.bank, and we can send you the scenario, if you will, or the equation. Or if you've been following along on video, then it'll be available there too. So,
and if you want to have a bigger, if you want to have a conversation with somebody, you can call your loan officer or anyone that's a loan officer, and just have the conversation. Don't be afraid to know what the facts are, because you don't know what you don't know. And then, have the conversation. So many people, I think, are just afraid to ask. They're afraid of rejection. They're afraid of not being ready. But most of the time when people are worried about that, they're a lot more ready than they believe themselves to be.
Yeah.
And they know now, they can make an effective decision based on actual facts.
Yeah. It's better to be surprised and say, yeah, I can do this, versus, oh, I could have done this a long time ago.
Right.
And, you know what assuming does, right? It's makes something out of you and me, but it's so true. Not knowing is half the battle, So find out if you can do it.
Absolutely.
So I think don't ask where rates are at. I mean,
you can ask.
You can ask. You should ask.
My response is going to be, have you thought about what you need your payment to be?
Yeah. And I think that's exactly spot on. And what are you comfortable with?
100%.
And
most people, by the way, when I ask them that, haven't thought about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and or they say, oh, well, my rent's $2,000.
Yep.
So I guess $2,000. And there's just, again, they just don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's really more about not timing the market, not saying, oh my gosh, rates are at a 3-year low. It's really more about, when are you financially ready to make the plunge? And I wish more people would look at their home as a financial vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's a home. You build memories. It shelters you from the storm, everything else. But it's bigger than that.
Yeah.
And most people miss that.
Yeah, I agree.
Especially young people. I don't know. Yeah. Good topics. I like that.
It was a good one.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us today on Mortgage Momentum. If you thought this was a great episode or want to give us feedback, we always take it. Please like, share, and feel free to send this to anybody that might need this information. They're everywhere, like literally everywhere. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Mortgage Momentum.
Thanks for joining us on Mortgage Momentum. If you got value from today's episode, subscribe, share it with a friend, leave a review, or email us feedback at mortgagemomentum@bell.bank.
We always welcome comments, feedback, and suggestions for future shows. Thanks for joining us, and keep your momentum going. Until next time.